I'm a relatively new fan of Formula One. And look, I've been obsessed with F1 for months. My girlfriend makes fun of me. If I watch YouTube videos, all I'm watching is Formula One stuff, learning and watching. And I'm watching old races from the 80s because I'm a nerd and I'm weird. And in the process of learning the sport, I've come up with a glossary of important words you need to know. When you watch a race, there are words that are thrown out all the time, a lot of phrases and words. And, some I already knew, some were common sense for me. Like I knew that yellow flags meant caution. We'll get into that in a minute, though, in case you don't know. But I figured I'd share my list to, help people. If you're on YouTube and you want to add to my list, maybe, I don't know that this is a video for experienced F1 fans. But if you're someone who knows a lot about F1 and you're like, hey, Zach, there's another thing you left off I think you should have mentioned, feel free. Comment below and share whatever word or phrase you think I've left out of my list and my glossary for Formula One. Now, let's start with DRS. You hear the word and the phrase DRS said all the time. It stands for drag reduction system. So the rear wing of an F1 car basically works like a parachute, limiting speed a little bit. It also creates downforce. But what happens when you use the drag reduction system is it's a mechanical movement of the rear wing where the rear wing flattens, making it literally so it's exactly what it sounds like. It reduces the drag that's created on the car. And it helps cars pass each other. It makes you go a little bit faster and you can pass each other on straightaways. Now, you can only use DRS in specific DRS-labeled zones. There are straightaways on very specific parts of tracks. Hungary, I believe, has 2 DRS zones from last weekend. And you can only use DRS if you're within a second of the car in front of you. If you're right behind them on their butt, you can engage DRS and pass them and get around them. So again, you need to be in the right spot. You need to be in a DRS zone. And you need to be close enough within 1 second in order to engage DRS. That's what happens. This is a really poor example, but it does remind me, if you ever played the video game Need for Speed, it's kind of like a real, very cool physics way of using like a nitrous boost in the Need for Speed video game. That's silly. That's very crude. It's much oversimplified, but it's basically a way to get a little bit more speed to pass somebody on a straightaway. Now, number 2, we have a racing line. It's a word you hear a lot. It's pretty straightforward. A racing line is the optimal path to take around a track. It's the best way around. It's the best angles you can take to get the most speed. If you play the Forza video game, they literally put lines on the screen for you to try and follow. That's a racing line. Now, an apex is similar to a racing line. It's also related to turning, where you would say, like, if you said it in a sentence, you would say that, man, that guy hit the apex of the turn. And what it is the best way and the best line around a turn. Usually it's using the center of the turn, where it's the path you can take to waste as little time as possible and stay at the top speed or as the highest speed as you possibly can. You got to slow down a little bit, but if you take the right angle, you can keep your speed a little bit higher than if you go too wide or too narrow and have to slow down a little bit too much. Basically, if you go too wide or too narrow, you lose time. So you want to hit the apex of a turn. That's what that means. It's usually the center of the turn. I'll put up a great graphic of it that explains it a little bit better. That's the apex. Now, braking point is the area where you hit the brakes leading up to a turn. As you're heading towards a turn, it turns on your right, you're about to turn. There's a point where you hit the brakes, and you want to wait as long as you can before you hit the brakes. If you brake too early, then you lose too much speed and too much time, and the turn is too slow. But if you wait too long and the braking point is too late, then you can run really wide on the exit of the turn and go off the track. So that leads me a little bit to oversteer and understeer, where oversteer is basically exactly like it sounds. It's where you're turning left, you turn too far to left, you turn too much. That's an oversimplified way to put it, but what happens is if you oversteer into the turn and you turn too much into the turn, then you can lose the back end of your car and you'll fishtail. Now, understeering can be simplified to your car doesn't turn enough and you run wide. This happens often, and it's usually because you lose grip on the track, where you're either going too fast or you brake too hard and your tires lock up and you lose grip. So you're sliding and your car goes too wide of the turn. That's called an understeer. So an oversteer, you go too narrow and then you lose the back end. The oversteer is where you lose grip on the front and usually go wide of a turn. So what is locking up? I just said that locking up refers to the brakes. You can imagine it. You're locking up, you're tightening something. You lock up the brakes when you completely stop the tires from spinning, even though the car is still moving. So that's when you enter a slide usually. You can even be on a straightaway, lock up your brakes, and then it's what happens when you apply too much braking power. We saw Charles Leclerc do this yesterday, and it resulted in him getting past where there was a pretty big gap between the car and him behind him. He tried to hit his brakes briefly. He actually hit him too hard. He locked up, and the car behind him got in a good distance and passed him, even though it looked like nothing. You saw a little bit of smoke for half a second. That actually led to him getting passed. It's where your tires aren't spinning because you hit the brakes too hard, even though your car is still moving and has momentum in a direction. Now, dirty air. Dirty air is a phrase you will hear all the time. It also has to do, it's related to slipstreaming. We'll get into that in a minute. I'll be honest, this is a highly complicated aerodynamic, kind of a manipulation of physics, and we'll talk about it. It's interesting to me. The best way I can explain it is, and I guess maybe manipulation of physics is more DRS, which DRS is so cool to me. Picture a speedboat. When a speedboat drives through water, what happens behind the speedboat? Creates a big wake, because when you're moving through the water, it disturbs and moves the water, creating a wake behind you. And when you drive a car through the air, a similar thing happens with the air. There's a wake behind a car. I mean, everyone's seen like, I don't know, a Chevy or Ford commercial where they show a car in a wind tunnel and the air flows over the car. What's behind the car is a wake of some kind. Now, in F1, you have the rear wing and the front wing, and they're like flaps that push air up and create downforce where the car is being pushed a little bit into the ground. And it gives cars more grip, and it raises the cornering speeds. So in F1, if you follow an F1 car really closely, the air is being pushed up behind the car. And if you follow an F1 car really closely on a straightaway, you can actually go faster because the air behind an F1 car is literally thinner than it is in front of the lead car. There's usually less air to fight against you, and you can use the speed boost to get past the lead car in front of you. That's called slipstreaming. If you ever played Mario Kart, I played Mario Kart on my Nintendo Switch, where there's that little moment where a bunch of air starts happening. That's when you slipstream the car, and then you get up, and then you pass them. That's called slipstreaming. That's on a straightaway. So on a straightaway, being really close behind an F1 car is slipstreaming. Now, if you follow the car closely around a turn, that's when you start running into the phrase dirty air. So it's good to follow a car on a straightaway. The problem is, as you turn, the air disruption is so sporadic, chaotic, and less predictable, the air movement behind the car, that it actually makes it harder for you to drive and makes it easier for you to lose control. So that is what dirty air is. Dirty air is when you follow a car really closely, and then as the car turns, dirty air hits you and causes you to lose control of your car. It also has to do with overheating. There's other effects it can have on a car, but that's the main thing. Straightaways or slipstreaming around a corner, that's when you run into dirty air. Both are happening behind a car when you're really close behind them. Now, before we get into tires, there are 3 more things I want to talk about. The tires are fascinating to me, but it's worth mentioning just in case you don't know. When you hear on the radio in Formula 1, you hear people say box. They'll say like, box, and what that means is just come in and get a pit stop. You know, pit stop, you go in for a pit stop, you visit mechanics to have a tire change or refuel or adjust something on the car. When people say box, they're saying, hey, come into the pit lane. The yellow flags, I mentioned it earlier, mean caution. There's danger on the track, slow down, no passing. Blue flags are for slow cars, where if I'm going really, really slow and the car behind me is a lap ahead of me, they'll wave a blue flag, hey, Zach, slow down, get out of the way so the car behind you can pass. If there's a lap or more gap between the car behind you that's coming up on you and you, they'll wave the blue flag, hey, just get out of the way, let the faster car get around you. Now, Formula 1 tires. I love this stuff. You might not know, they're filled with nitrogen actually, because nitrogen is a more stable air. It helps people keep the tire temperatures more stable, because nitrogen is a more stable gas than air. Never knew that, never would have thought of that. That's pretty cool. Now, Formula 1 tires, there are 6 words you need to know. There are only 5 variations of tires, but there's one extra word you need to understand. Let's start with the wet tires. Wet tires have really big, deep grooves on them. It helps to displace water and prevent hydroplaning. And they're marked with a blue stripe. So wets are made for dealing with heavy rain and standing water on the track. That's one type of wet weather tire. Now, then you have intermediate tires. They are marked with the green stripe, and they have a little bit smaller grooves than the wets. They're made for a wet track that doesn't have as much standing water, maybe not as heavy rain, when the tire's wet and slick, but not maybe driving through gigantic puddles. So wet tires in Formula One have grooves on them. Tires for dry conditions, oddly enough, you never would have guessed this. If you're driving a tire for a dry condition, they're called slicks. Here's why. They're called slicks because there's no grooves on the tires. They're completely smooth around the outside. They're smooth because the design is to create as much area of contact as possible with the tire and the track. The more tire touching the track, the more grip there is. They're super grippy tires. Now, there are 3 types of slicks used right now in Formula One. There are soft tires, which are marked with the red stripe. They let the car go the fastest, but they also don't last as long. So Lewis Hamilton in Hungary he had like 2 laps left to go. He just wanted to go fast and try to get fastest lap. He wasn't worried about the longevity of the tires. He put on the soft tires to get the fastest lap and go the fastest way around the track. They help you go fast, but they don't last very long, and you'll need a pit stop soon to change a tire because they wear down and wear thin. Now, the other extreme, you go from soft tires on one side, they're fast, but don't last very long. You have hard tires, a harder compound of tires on the other extreme where they aren't as fast. They're the slowest of the slicks, but they do last a lot longer. So if you want a longer experience that isn't as fast, then you go for the hard tires. That sounds so wrong. It's not my intention. Now, somewhere in the middle is medium tires. Oh, by the way, soft tires are red. Hard tires are marked with a white stripe. So that's soft and hard. Now, between that is a medium tire. Medium tires are marked with a yellow stripe. They're the balance of the 2 extremes. They'll go faster than a hard tire, and they'll last longer than a soft tire. But they're not the fastest, and they're not the longest lasting. They're just a balance in the middle. Now, I find this stuff really fascinating. I love this stuff. Those are the words I came up with, the words and phrases. I kind of, when I organize the show, I imagine I'm talking to my dad. My dad knows nothing. And if I was trying to explain Formula One to my dad, those are the phrases I would need to know and I would want to know. Now, if there's something I'm leaving out, please let me know. I am much happy. I'm very happy, much happy. I'm very happy for you to leave a comment on YouTube down below. Let me know if there's a phrase you think I left out that's important for the audience to know. I'm putting this video on YouTube because I want it to be kind of a group area where you can have discussion and teach people about Formula One. I think it'd be really cool. And I wish I'd seen a video like this a couple weeks ago, months ago. In December, when I learned about Formula One, I wish I'd had a video like this to help me understand the phrases and have as a guide to Formula One. I had to learn all this stuff on my own, but I encourage you, if there's other stuff I left out, please comment down below.